Thank you so much, Jason. Such a pleasure having you here. How have you
It's a pleasure
been?
to be here.
Pleasure is all mine, trust me. Uh, Jason, I've heard so much about you. I've heard so many interviews that you have been a guest on,
Mm,
and I've heard so many stories about you. The way you started to being where you are today as the chief editor of entrepreneur.com. Just
mm.
curious to know, who is Jason without his titles?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Who is Jason without his titles? Jason is a guy who is very curious and has always been interested in figuring out how to share something with people that they will find some joy in. That's really the through line because that's what I was doing before the fun titles. I mean, prior to the titles that I have now, I was an editor at different magazines, and and the thing that and prior to that I was a newspaper reporter, and prior to that I was a kid writing a blog.
Hmm.
And the through line really is that I've always been fascinated with communication, with the ability to could put something into the world and have people react to it. And
Hmm.
my career has been about trying to figure out what it is that I actually have to say and who wants to hear it. And
Hmm.
and right, it's like being a good communicator really requires two things. It requires having something to say, and then convincing people that you're worth listening to. And there have been a lot of times in my career where I had something to say, but I hadn't been able to convince anyone that I had something to listen to, that I was worth listening to. And then, frankly, when I first got to entrepreneur, I had the opposite problem, which was that I suddenly was someone who, just by my title alone, was someone that people thought they should listen to, and I wasn't sure I had anything to say because
Hmm.
I didn't come from an entrepreneurial background, and so I was kind of intimidated by
Hmm.
speaking to this audience, particularly once they thought of me as an authority, which I didn't think of myself at the
Hmm.
time. And it took a long time to figure out how to be the thing that people wanted me to be,
Hmm.
and how to do it in a way that felt authentic, so that it was really an extension of the work that I've always been doing.
This is so interesting. In my mind, from what I'm listening, is a dichotomy that how can I be what people want me to be and yet holding the platform of authenticity? I'll come back to that. But
Mm.
before that, would love to hear from you. What was that moment in your life when you were willing to let go of the identity that you were wrapped into? Because very early we learn as individuals that we have to tie ourselves with an identity, as you
Yeah.
mentioned that I was a news reporter, and then I was an editor, and then I
Right.
was a blog writer. Similarly, a lot of things happened with me as well. I'm an engineer, I'm an MBA, I'm a banker, i'm a I'm a facilitator, I'm an executive coach, I'm a podcaster. I've attached myself with so many identities. And the moment I start to reflect, who am I without my identity, without who am I without my titles, I suddenly feel so scared.
Mm-hmm.
What was that moment when you could actually cut that tie and experience the freedom when you're talking about that Jason is a curious being?
Yeah. Well, look, part of the foundation of your question is that this thing that I share with people. It's in this book that I wrote, Build for Tomorrow, which is that I think that people need to find a way to identify the thing about them that does not change in times of change, and and separate their identity from the output of their work. People far too often tie their identities very closely to the output of their work, to the work that they do, to the product that they make, to the role that they occupy, which is all fine and makes sense. But the problem is, of course, that all that stuff is very changeable. So that the second it changes, it doesn't just feel like a change to your work, it feels like a change to your identity. That is what feels so disruptive. So what we need to do, and what I see entrepreneurs do very well, or at least some of them, is to come up with, it's not a mission statement so much as it is a self-description, a kind of a description of your core in which every word is carefully selected because it is not anchored to something that is easily changeable. So for me, the line that I use for myself is I tell stories in my own voice. And it's a very intentional word choice. I tell stories, not magazine stories, not newspaper stories, not podcasts, not books, because of course any of that stuff is very easily changeable. If I identified as a magazine editor, my boss could call me up right now while we're on this call and he could fire me. It's certainly within his right to do that. And if he does, then I am no longer a magazine editor. And if my identity is as a magazine editor, then I'm one phone call away from losing my identity. That's a very dangerous place to be. So I tell stories. You can't take stories away from me. I could do stories in any number of ways. I'm doing it right now. And then in my own voice is me setting the terms for how I want to operate. I've reached a point in my career where I'm not interested in carrying the ball. I'm interested in really defining the space. So how did I get to that? It wasn't a singular moment. I can't think back to a singular moment as a turning point, but what I can think to were a number of times in which I was confronted with a dissatisfaction over something that I had always thought I wanted. So I spent a lot of time being a newspaper, or wanting to be a newspaper reporter, and then being a newspaper reporter and really loving the status of that and the identity of it, but then discovering that I didn't like the work. And then later thinking of myself as a magazine editor and being at magazines that I frankly didn't want to be at anymore, or finally getting to do something that I thought I always wanted to do. I mean, I spent a lot of time thinking I just want to be a features editor. And all I want to do is edit long magazine stories. But I'll tell you what, once you learn how to do it and then you do it 50, 75, 100 times, you're kind of done with it. Like it's time, at least I am. I want to do something else. And then I start to feel stuck. And it was in those moments where I was really forced to think, well, what am I? And my instinct wasn't to go through this kind of mental exercise, come up with a sentence, right? My instinct at first was actually just to produce different things. What else am I interested in? What else do I like? I made funny viral website. I poured a lot of energy into social media, but these things just weren't that satisfying. And I think that was partially because what I was looking for was just another way to define my identity by some different output of my work. And it took a long time, but I remember at some point thinking to myself, how would I describe myself if I didn't describe myself by my work? And that question was just very intriguing. And I remember asking friends to do it for themselves, and it would spark these interesting conversations. And I realized I'm onto something. I'm onto something. People don't do this very often. I haven't done it for myself, but it seems like a really valuable exercise. And I cannot even remember when I came up with the phrase, I tell stories in my own voice. But it's something that I'm very, very glad I have.
I love it. I love it. What I'm picking up right now is that every time when I'm attaching myself to any identity, it's going to cause some kind of dissatisfaction. Now, that dissatisfaction has got some opportunity for us. Provided I'm willing to dig deeper into that and say, hey, what am I attaching myself to that's causing that dissatisfaction? And that could be a turning point in my life, because that might give me the statement, as you said. You may call it mission statement or not, but I really love it when you said that we need a mission statement in which every word is not subject to easy change, in which every word is core to us. I just love it.
It's funny. I travel a lot and I speak to executive teams or, larger teams at very large companies. I mean, in the last week alone, I've spoken to teams in person or virtually at Pfizer, Accenture, Google, Aon, the insurance company. And I do this exercise with them. I have a way to walk people through it where I set up this. I mean, if you want to do it for yourself, I set up this scenario, which is that someone comes up to you at a party and asks what you do. And, what do you say? Well, the first thing that you're going to say is you're going to talk about your tasks. And so the thing that you do every day, the role that you occupy. So, okay, now let's run the scenario again. Someone comes up to a party, asks what you do, but now you can't talk about your tasks. Like anything that you just said or thought before is off the table. So what do? Well, you talk about your skills, what you're good at, and so on. And then let's run it one more time. Someone comes up to a party and asks what you do, and now you can't talk about your tasks or your skills. So anything you had thought of before is off the table. Now, what are you left with? What on earth do you talk about? And that's how we get down to this single sentence. And I give people examples from others. And I will tell you, when I first started doing that, I would say that I started doing that in talks maybe 2 years ago, a year and a half to 2 years ago is when I started doing that in talks. And I was nervous the first couple times I did it. And the reason was because I thought very, very experienced people who have accomplished a lot are going to find this to be a kind of infantilizing exercise, right? Like they don't need to think about this. They're building giant companies. They're making more money than I am. They don't need to think about this stupid sentence. It's going to sound just, like I'm bringing a children's homework to, an adult party. But I will tell you, it is the thing that people comment on the most after my talk. They come up to me and they tell me what they came up with for themselves. Because, of course, as I'm running them through this exercise and explaining my own experience with it, they're thinking about it for themselves. And they've had some time to marinate on it, and they're very excited to share the answer. And the answers are all really interesting. I've heard people just come up and say, you know what, my core is I help sell companies. I help people achieve big things. I help. I solve complex problems. Just really basic. Core could not be more like down to the cellular level. And I think it is just, they are excited to think about it. They're excited to have come up with some kind of answer. And it really showed me that it doesn't matter at what level of work you work, that you are probably not contemplative enough about why you do the things that you do. Yeah. And spending any time thinking about that is time that you're really investing in your future, because it will give you an understanding of who you really are and how your skills are transferable.
Yeah. And I think it's like walking on a tightrope, because it should not be very generic that anyone and everyone can paint it. At the same time, it should not be to that cellular level that you're not being able to differentiate between the woods and the trees. So that's the kind of walking on the tightrope it is. Just in coming back to the statement that you made, that how can I be what people would want me to be, at the same time holding the authentic ground. How do these two things converge together? What's your take on this?
I have always thought that the key to having a happy career is to figure out the intersection of what you're good at and what you're interested in. Because, there are a lot of people who are really good at stuff they're not interested in. And there are a lot of people who are interested in stuff that they're not very good at. And I've experienced both. I have been good at being a newspaper reporter. People valued my work, but I didn't really like doing it. I was bored by it. And then I've been interested in things. I've tried writing screenplays, other works of fiction. I'm not good at that. I was interested in it, but it just wasn't the thing that I was good. So if you can find the intersection of the thing that you're good at and the thing that you're interested in, then you're on the right path towards some kind of fulfillment for yourself, and also putting yourself in a position to create value for others. And that idea, which I don't know, occurred to me some long time ago, that idea I find interesting and flexible, right? So I can take that and then apply it to, well, okay, I'm a communicator. I think the thing that I'm really, really good at is gathering and processing information and making it useful to others. I think that's my core skill. And And by the way, the reason for that, or for that for me, is here's a kind of random philosophy of people that I have, which is that I think that all humans have the same skill, the same core skill, and that skill is pattern matching. That is a distinct human ability. The difference is that we're all naturally better at matching different patterns. So I am really good at seeing at like gathering information, like I said, sort of gathering information, talking to people, hearing things that I think are going to resonate with others, and then figuring out how to share that information in a way that's very sticky to them. And to be able to create a comprehensive worldview to understand these stories so that I can share them. But then I meet other people who their skill set is walking into a failing business and stopping the bleeding, right? Stabilizing a failing business. I can't do that to save my life. There's no way that if there's a business that's failing that you would want me to walk in and be the guy to try to stop it. That's not my pattern match. I don't know how to look at the data sets. I don't know how to see how one company did it and then apply it to another company. That's not me. That's somebody else. But the skill set is the same. It's pattern matching. And so once I understand my pattern, then I want to figure out, well, how do I use it in a way in which I'm creating value that I find very satisfying to create and that I can see people respond to well. I mean, I created viral websites that were funny, that people laughed at or they got angry at, and it created news, and I had reporters calling me, and that was fun, but also it was so empty. Like there were zero people reached out to me as a result of me creating a funny viral website and said, you know what, you changed how I think about work, or like, you inspired me to do this different thing. And now I get those messages. And I got to say, for me, and look at that, this isn't a value judgment. Not everybody has to go around the world like feeling like they're inspiring others. But for me, it was more powerful. That was a more powerful response than, haha, that thing is funny. And I found that for me, that's a thing that matters. I didn't know it mattered until I started doing it. But once I did, I really wanted to lean into it.
So what I'm listening is three things, right? One is identify something that you're really good at. Identify something that you're really interested in. And identify something that can actually create an impact in the world, something that can positively inspire others. Is my understanding right?
I think that's right. But look, I will refine the line you used to make an impact on the world. And the only reason is because that can sound so big that it just sounds impractical or impossible. I hope I'm doing good work. I don't know that I'm changing the world.
But as long as I'm inspiring somebody.
But if I'm changing somebody, if somebody emails me and says, you changed how I think, or, I mean, look, I'll give you, because I just got a DM from somebody today. So I'll just read it to you, because this, I like live for this stuff. She wrote, it's just DM on Instagram. I don't know this person. I just wanted to thank you. I was on a podcast recently and he asked me to tell him more about me, expecting me to say I'm an event planner. Nope. I'm someone who loves to help people celebrate life, and I do so through event planning. So that clearly is somebody who heard that exact message that we were talking about earlier, and it got her thinking that she works in event planning, but no, she's someone who helps people celebrate life. And that by itself, that idea clearly inspired all sorts of thinking and action on her part. That's an incredible change to somebody. And it just, in the menu of things that I have done, this work is the only time that anyone has ever reached out to me with those kinds of messages. And I have to tell you that to me, that people are reacting that way and that I feel good about it tells me that I've found that right intersection.
So true. In fact, this reminds me of a conversation that had at NASA when somebody asked a janitor, what do you do? And instead of saying that I clean the office, the janitor responded, I help people reach moon.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that before. It's a great anecdote. I wonder if
Yeah.
it's true, but it's a lovely anecdote. You know, I remember talking to Greg Fleischman, who's the CEO of Foodsters, a company that makes baking mixes and other sweet goods. And they were going through a big change. The product was changing, and it was somewhat turbulent. And I asked him if he was disappointed by having to make some kind of sacrifices. And he said no, because it goes back to, why do you start a business to begin with? And our business is to bring joy to people with upgraded sweet baked goods. And, you know, when he said that, I thought that is just such an incredibly intelligent way to think about what you do every day when you show up to work. Because if you think we're in the business of selling baking mixes, well, what happens if people stop liking baking mixes? You're pretty stuck. You know, what you're stuck doing now is trying to convince people to buy baking mixes. But if people don't want baking mixes, then you're just fighting, you know, you're fighting a wave of an ocean wave. You can't fight an ocean wave. So, but if your mission is, I bring joy to people with sweet, well, people always want joy, and there's always ways to upgrade something. And so that gives you so much more flexibility. If people stop liking baking mixes one day, it doesn't really matter. Go find whatever they want now and then deliver that to them. Right. That allows you to be more customer centric, because if you are defensive over trying to hold your position, then you are really just focused on solving your own problem. My problem is that people don't like baking mixes anymore. And therefore, the solution has to be convince people to like baking mixes. That's not solving other people's problems. That's solving your problem. But if you are able to frame what you do in a way that is driven by the needs of others, well, then if people don't like baking mixes, then they must love something, or maybe they're searching for something new to love. Either way, it's now your opportunity to solve that problem.
What a beautiful analogy, Jason. Thank you. You know, since you are talking about entrepreneurs and you do a lot of work with entrepreneurs, just curious. I do a lot of work with C-suite executives. I do a lot of work with people who are working professionals. What is that one thing you can learn from an entrepreneur that if you could implement as an employee, it would be equally fulfilling?
The thing that strikes me most about entrepreneurs is that entrepreneurs are what I like to call vertical thinkers. I'll tell you a little quick story that illustrates this. So when my wife and I wrote a romantic comedy together in, I think it was 2018. And, you know, we started working on it before I got to Entrepreneur Magazine. But by the time it came out, I was editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. So everybody is like, why does this exist? Or like, what is this book? Writer friends of mine, they would say, congratulations, so exciting that you wrote this book. You sold it. It's amazing. Entrepreneurs would say, oh, that's interesting. What are you going to do with it? Because to them, the only reason to do something is because it is the foundation upon which the next thing will be built. It is the difference, I realize, between horizontal thinking and vertical thinking, where most people, myself included for a very long time, are horizontal thinkers, which is to say you put something out in the world and then you move along, you put something else out in the world, and you move along. And you don't really accrue. Whereas vertical thinkers make decisions based on that action today leads to action tomorrow. Knowledge today leads to further opportunity tomorrow. And this helps entrepreneurs filter opportunities, but it also helps them be mindful of how everything that they do can be gathered together into a greater whole. I mean, this filters down in ways like big and small. It has helped me strategize how to develop my career by thinking about how the things that I'm going to do should lead to specific outcomes later. But then also, you know, I encounter a lot of very impressive people, and I always have, because it's one of the pleasures of being in media. But for the most of my career, I didn't try to capture that information in any way. I would meet people, but then I would leave them, and that would be it. We met, and now we aren't in touch. Now I have a spreadsheet that I call Good Contacts, and everybody who I interact with, who is interesting and who I think might be of some value in the future, they go on the spreadsheet. It's an ever-growing body of contacts. And it is because I am always thinking that every single day, basically everything that I do can lead to something more tomorrow. It has to be vertical thinking. So that's an unnatural way of thinking. I don't think it's how most people do, but I do think that the average employee would do well to think that way, because it's not just about, like, you don't have to do that and then leave and start your own business. That's not for everybody. It's in fact kind of a crazy path to take, is to start your own business. You do it only if you feel compelled, like you have to. There are a lot of people who build wonderful, fulfilling careers inside of companies, but what would happen if you were more mindful about how the things that you're doing today or building today, or the knowledge that you're gathering today, will be specifically useful tomorrow, and you're running a kind of constant thought experiment about how you can better qualify yourself for future opportunities right now. That starts to give you a different pathway forward. And it also doesn't drive you into a place where you might feel stuck, because you're always thinking about what comes next, and you have some kind of plan, or at least hypothesis, about what comes next. It was a transformative way of thinking for me.
In fact, that brings me to your book that you have written, Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career.
Yes.
An absolute delight to go through this book, Jason. Just loving every single story that you have poured into this, every single page that you have written. Just curious, there are so many changes happening in the economy, and especially in the world that we are living in today. No two consecutive days are similar. And here you are talking about future-proofing your career. How does that fit in here? One, how can I anticipate what's the next wave which is coming in that I need to be ready for? How can I make sure that I'm ready? So many questions.
Well, you can't. I mean, you can't anticipate every change, because it's just beyond the capacity of a human being to do. We are very, very comically bad at predicting the future as human beings. So it's worth having a lot of constantly revised hypotheses about what's coming next and where new opportunity is. And you should be exploring that and running little experiments to test it. But when I say future-proof, I don't really mean that it's possible that you could find something right now that you will be able to do until you retire. That's not possible. Instead, what I'm really talking about is building yourself and whatever it is that you are building, your enterprise, your career, in a way in which you're anticipating that change will come. It will come in large ways and small. It will come in pandemics and lost clients. It'll be everything. And the more in which you can orient yourself to the reality that everything that you do is changeable, the more you start to just build that reality into the way in which you operate today. You start to understand yourself differently in the way in which we've talked about defining your identity. But you also just start to make decisions in which maybe you're doing something that is maybe painful or inefficient now, because you know that it's going to be more valuable later. It's going to put you in a position that's going to be more impactful later. You are reframing how you see changes in your life and your business as not loss, but as potential gain, and that the greatest opportunity available to you is to try to identify that gain before other people do. But you have to stop thinking about how to protect what has happened to you or what you have lost, and rather start to think about, what do people need now, and how do I provide that? What I offer is hopefully something of a step-by-step guide of how to think through these challenges and how to think differently about yourself Because future proofing, look, you can't opt out of the future. So future proofing doesn't mean that you find something now and you stick with it. Instead, what it means is that you really understand yourself so well that you're sticking with that, and that you're finding new opportunities where they are.
Mm, mm. And I love the process that you have mentioned in that book. There are 4 steps that you have mentioned. The first one is pause when others start to panic, because you have spoken about that. Why do people panic in whenever the changes there around them? The second step that you talk about is be the first to change before you have to, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this reminds me of a beautiful quote that says, listen to life, listen to the whispers of life before life starts to scream in your ears. So, as you are mentioning, be the first to change before you have to. The third point that you mentioned is lead the change to the new normal. And the fourth point is seize new opportunities that did not exist before.
Yeah.
Just taking one step forward, Jason, I personally believe writing a book requires huge amount of efforts, and
Mm-hmm.
one goes through transformation self at the self level, at the identity level. There comes a moment in writing a book when you find it extremely difficult to write, because there are certain points that you are mentioning in the book you have not been able to implement the same points in your life.
Mm.
Just curious, which was that part in this book did you find most difficult to write? And what shifts did you undergo as the part of this process?
Well, the part that I found hardest to write was not one part of the book. It was honestly learning how to write a book. It's a funny thing. I went into this with a pretty high level of confidence because my entire career is oriented around writing, and I've one of the ways in which I think I have been able to thrive and have reached the place that I'm at is that I have been able to figure out how to communicate in lots of different styles. You know, a lot of times I think people, they find something and they consider it their specialty, and then they kind of stick with it. And the more in which you focus on doing one thing, the less in which you're going to be in touch with how to do other things. And I never wanted to get there. So I have learned magazine writing in many different ways, right? How to write for Men's Health audience, how to write for a business audience, how to write. I've done comedy writing. I did newspaper writing. I've done a lot of podcast scripting and so on. And so that kept me pretty versatile. So I figured, well, getting into a book will be no problem. But my editor, Matthew Benjamin at Penguin Random House in the US, he told me once he acquired the book, he said, well, spend the next like 2 months or something writing the first 4 chapters and then send them to me. And then we'll take a look at them. I said, all right. And I kind of knocked him out real fast. And I sent it to him, and then we got on the phone. And he told me in a very nice, thoughtful way, because he's a great editor, but he basically was like, you have not written book chapters. What you've written are kind of random magazine, like long magazine articles. And magazine articles do not just combine into a book. You have to write a book. And I think that you need to think differently about the structure of the information that you have and how to have it build upon itself, and how to make each chapter feel like it's coherent with the next. And, one of the things I really love that he did there was that he had me write first. He didn't give me a whole bunch of instructions. He didn't give me some game plan, because that would have made me feel, I suppose, like I was out of control. This wasn't my project. Now I just have to do paint by numbers to his idea. I mean, I'm not defensive about my work like that, but I could see how that would be how people would process it. So instead, what he did was he just said, right, just do it. And then let's have something to work off of. And that feedback really forced me to step back and think more fundamentally, not just about the ideas that I have to express, but also about the way in which to express them. And what I started to do was then pull out incredibly successful books, not to look at the ideas that were in them, but rather just to look at how they structured the book. How many sections were in the book? How many chapters were in each section? How are the sections related to each other? How did the book progress? What did they do at the beginning and end of each chapter to make it feel like it interlocked with the chapter that came before or after? And after looking at a number of these, particularly Greg McKeown's Essentialism was just had a structure that I found very appealing. I was able to step back and say, aha, now I understand how to orient my information in a way that feels like it's a book and not a magazine article. So that was hard. And that was really the education and learning how to write a book. And I'm really grateful for it. It helped me unlock a different way to tell stories. The hardest part to implement in my life, it's a very challenging question. I think that, it's funny, as I was writing this book about change, and the book is oriented around this idea that I call wouldn't go back, which is that you reach a moment where you say, I have something so new and valuable that I wouldn't want to go back to a time before I had it. I was trying to grapple with, well, what is my wouldn't go back moment? Because I was writing it during the pandemic. I mean, during the heavier days of the pandemic, and my family, my wife and 2 children, had relocated from New York, where we live, to Colorado because there was more space. My parents are out there. We were living with them. And I came to really like it out there. And I started to wonder, is my wouldn't go back that we should move to Colorado and I should spend my days biking? And, we made great friends. And my wife was not interested in that at all. And so we didn't move to Colorado. We moved back to New York. But I wasn't fully satisfied where we were. It was a small space. And I just felt like there are parts of my life that I want different. And, what's funny is that what we ended up doing about 2 months ago is that we moved to a very different part of Brooklyn. We were in a very trendy part of Brooklyn where we could only afford a very small space. We moved further out to a much quieter, more residential part of Brooklyn. Nobody would call this area trendy, but we got a lot more space. And I found that this neighborhood out here that I once would have just thought, who would ever want to live there, is actually a wonderful place to be. And the pace of life is a little bit different, and I really appreciate it. And I guess this is the wouldn't go back moment that we got to. It was really unexpected, but I was grappling with, what is it for me? It's a weird thing to know that something about your life is going to change, but not know what it is. And I think the greatest thing that you can do is just be open to that it will happen, and then figuring out what should it be, and what sacrifices are you willing to make to get there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Considering the paucity of the time, a very simple question, and then I would ask you the last question.
Sure.
This question is, in your book, you have mentioned you come from future.
Yeah.
If you can just share a sentence or two on this when you're talking about you come from future.
Yeah, sure. You come from the future is my way of saying, and there's a whole chapter on it, but I'll be really fast. Is basically my way of reminding you that you are the product of change. We are all very concerned about new things. You reach, it's like you hit the age of 35 and suddenly every new technology seems scary. And it's worth remembering that literally everything that we do was weird and new to somebody else, from the clothing that we wear to the way that we communicate to the to our interests and hobbies. And there was always somebody who said, "Oh, that's not a good way to be," or "Oh, that's going to be damaging." But we are the product of exactly that, and we're okay. And that means that we're the evidence that the next thing can't possibly be that bad either.
Out of curiosity, 3 years from now, I'm getting another opportunity to invite you again on this show. What do you think? What kind of future have you created for yourself that you're super thrilled and happy about?
Well, I don't. It's a good to know the answer to that. I often find that by the end of the year, I'm a little surprised. I would say the linear path would be that in 3 years, I have taken some of the ways that I serve people outside of entrepreneur, newsletter, podcasts, and I've turned them into more self-sustaining businesses, and that I've developed. I've either turned them into recognizable platforms all their own, or that I have built something else that looks like that, and that I've built some partnerships that are going to be game changers for me. I don't think that in 3 years I'll be a completely different person or anything like that, but I do think that I like to think of myself as very much in the development stage right now. And that I think some of those beta products will hopefully be a little more stable.
Last question.
Yeah.
With all the experience that you've been able to accumulate for yourself, Jason, having worked with so many entrepreneurs with different set of people, what do you know for sure with 100% surety and certainty?
Probably not that much. I look back on my work from even just a few years ago and I say, ooh, that was subpar work, or that was not delivering things nearly as well as I could now. But I've said it so often and nobody has ever disagreed with me, which is that the most important skill anybody can have is adaptability. And I feel pretty confident that that will hold true. So that's what I'm going to hang on to for myself too.
Thank you so much, Jason. Such a pleasure having you here. Loved this conversation, and I look forward to have you again on this show back sometime soon. Thank you.
I appreciate that. And hey, everybody, if you want to find Build for Tomorrow, you can find it on Amazon or anywhere you get books. It's also available in ebook and audiobook. So thanks for having me.
It's a must read. It's a must read.
Thank you.
Build for Tomorrow, Jason. Thank you so much, Jason. Such a pleasure having you here.
Oh, I appreciate it.